extremely rare in at least a large portion of our students' community. And of course, in the social uh, field, we find a lack of statesmanship all around. The concept of statesmanship is not new, and if you look at the literature that is around in relation to each generation calling out the lack of statesmanship in the polity, statesmen must have virtue, a sense of justice, and wisdom. These are the three essential elements that was identified. Because in the context of sovereign nations, no politician can really afford to go beyond the nationalist perspective and think about the world at large. I'm not giving you anything more than what you already know, given the audience profile, but it's something that is always better, no, if somebody points out these things that either we have already read, known, or practiced, or something that others around us are doing. So from that perspective, whatever is given over here is not really mine. It's just a compilation of what I have found, and some of which I have tried to imbibe as a teacher. And some of these are when we meet this current generation, some of these things are extremely rare in at least a large portion of our students' community. And of course, in the social uh, field, we find a lack of statesmanship all around. Or sometimes it could be on account of the fact that there is this observation, that the good is driven out by the bad from circulation. We get a new currency note, we tend to keep it in our pocket, and it's an old one that is always going to be let out into circulation. So from that perspective, probably yes, the larger number of bad apples in the political scene could be a reason why we do not really see statesmen uh, more in the society as compared to what is imperative for a nation to progress. That is one aspect to it. Now, even when I say these things, there are words that have multiple meanings, multiple perspectives, in fact, which really requires us to look into some of these aspects. First of all, let me just put up a disclaimer saying, in relation to whatever is there, because these are days when everything is controversial. So whatever is put over here is merely for the purpose of academic discussion, and it's not intended to hurt anybody or to, some of these things. It's one perspective, my perspective, that is all. So this is the scheme that I want to follow. One, it's considering what exactly is the statesmanship that we are following, or we want to follow, or we are expecting our future generation to imbibe. Second is the need for cultivating that kind of statesmanship, and then of course how to deal with it in the classrooms as such. So this idea is not new. The concept of statesmanship is not new, and if you look at the literature that is around in relation to each generation calling out the lack of statesmanship in the polity is not something that is recent. It's something that has been there for a pretty long time. No, in fact, right from the time when we people organize themselves into society and probably the modern state itself. It's all something that has been there. It's just nothing but old wine. The bottles change, the generations change, but we really feel sorry that we don't have enough statesmen as we as that particular generation or as that particular civilization requires. So Cicero's, by the way, I have put up some links also in relation to what books can be used for classroom teaching to understand these concepts. Some articles also. That is all part of these slides. I'll pass on the slides to the organizer so that can be shared. So this concept of statesmanship in the time of Cicero around, it's a BC, around 52 BC. This is what he was in his dialogue on the Republic, stating the virtues and ideals a true statesman must have. So this is what he noted. For one thing, the one of the observations that he noted is that there is no need for a descent as such. No, you need not have pedigree in order to become a statesman. So, especially in the context of our current political uh, dialogues, which mainly concentrate on how sons, daughters enter into politics, and the grandfathers and godfathers are there to nurture them. So, from that perspective, as early as in a era 2000 years ago, there was this observation that there is no need for anybody to be a godfather or anybody to be a heir apparent to somebody who was a statesman. So that's the first idea. But then a statesman man must have virtue, a sense of justice, and wisdom. These are the three essential elements that was identified, and my uh, uh, session will be focusing on building these kinds of uh, ideals. These particular characteristics in our students. Then there must also be a sense of dignity and a temperance, tempering in relation to the reaction to the society. And the statesman must is also expected to show generosity and is expected to be magnanimous. This was 2000 years ago when these observations were made, and even in the modern society, most of these things are desired features for a statesperson. Now, if you look at it, the globalized world, the concept of a political state itself, if you look at it from that perspective only, then the statesman will be construed in a very narrow manner, because we are looking at a globalized world where it is humanity and not just a nation state that ought to be the field for a statesperson. So a statesman, forgive me for the gender identification of this particular terminology, but it's supposed to encompass everybody, uh, not just the male gender, but again, words as it has evolved uh, gives us shows us a mirror to with respect to how it has evolved. So men have been at the helm of world affairs for a long period of time, and that shows one area where statesmanship has not really prevailed. The gender disparity is still there, but again, from the globalized perspective, you have Professor Jesse Rufus Fears, an American historian who is no more. Historian, scholar, educator, and author. He has identified this person, the sage person, as a free leader of a free people, possessing four critical qualities: a bedrock of principles, a moral compass, a vision, and the ability to build a consensus to achieve that vision. Now, the problem with respect to all these four is in the current scenario is that there are again different perspectives with respect to what principles, what morality, and the vision, and of course the way it is achieved with respect to this consensus. So these are problematic areas because we live in what is known as a post-truth world, and that creates some problems in relation to having a consensus on what these really constitute. Now, before going into that, uh, one more idea with respect to this statesman in the context of the modern political state. One is that it is a very complex kind of understanding, because a true statesman in a globalized world cannot be focused only on the local, because we are talking about, broadly in the context of democracies, especially liberal democracies. You don't reach those places where decisions are taken unless you are inherently a politician, which means that your immediate concern is getting elected, and that boils down to focusing on the local issues first. Only when you succeed in satisfying uh, the electorate will you get elevated to the position of being a lawmaker, and that creates problems, because the you forget, or you don't have time as a politician to focus on the larger picture if you're going to be cowed down, or placed into a rut where your only immediate focus is on firefighting the local issues. So that is a major problem with respect to the political class as such. It leaves them very little time and incentive to rise much beyond the immediate requirement of getting elected. And then no politician, no, because in the context of sovereign nations, no politician can really afford to go beyond the nationalist perspective and think about the world at large. So there is a problem with respect to uh, the being a statesman in the modern political state. You are expected to cater to your country's interests, and incidentally, if that helps the world, it is okay. But you cannot sacrifice the current the national interest for the sake of the world. So that approach also is something that creates a problem for being a statesperson. Then the other idea is that when you are a statesman, you are actually creating institutional structures, whether it is national or international, which effectively takes away the incentive of being a statesman. That means, what I'm trying to say is that you create, as a statesman, you create an institutional structure which is supposed to last for a long period of time, probably eternity, and which prevents others who are lesser statesmen from overturning it, or changing that structure, so that this structure that you've created will help lesser people, the political class as such, or the lesser leaders to lead. So that is where once the statesman is done, no, the done the original job of being a statesman, there is no requirement for a statesman anymore. So it's a uh, you kind of a suicide being a statesman. Your services are no longer required the more successful you are, and that is why most people are recognized as statesmen only after their death. And there was a cynical observation by one of the American authors that you are recognized when every politician becomes a statesman 10 or 20 years after their death. Again, but then not every politician is recognized by modernity as a statesman. So you have Mahatma Gandhi probably as a statesman, Nelson Mandela identified as a statesman, but no, nobody else in the current generation, or in the immediate past generation. No, very few people have been identified as statesmen. And when you look at it, it is mostly in the Western world that these statesmen, the recognition of statesmen has actually happened, and not necessarily in the remaining parts of the world, which is more populated as such. And then, so we are essentially looking for leaders who can transcend political boundaries in the way they think and act, but who are bound by the political structures already created to tame them in. So this contradiction is inherently there, and which sometimes, if you look at it, the larger picture, it might also explain why we don't have a political class who are statesmen. Then, in this context, right now, if you're looking for statesmen, where do we need these statesmen? So, the fight which happens at the local level, but a policy that gets implemented at the global level. You find global climate change as an essential aspect of statesmanship that ought to be there, which needs to be promoted. And everywhere you find across the world, you're finding the adverse effects of climate change, making us wish that somebody in our leadership comes forward with some idea that brings everybody together. No, even though there is a need for that leader to be there, we are finding a dearth of persons who can become those kinds of leaders. Then post-truth world shows up, in the context of how democracies are facing a crisis of confidence in relation to the disinformation war that is being fought. Whether it is the Indian elections or the US elections, you have seen how other countries have tried to influence public opinion, and disinformation has become the rule, making it impossible for people to really trust their information sources. And that, again, is a problem in the context of how effective somebody can be in the given structures to become to gain the stature of being a statesman. And of course, the scourge of terrorism is there, which is being used as a political tool, which undermines democratic processes. And only a statesman can actually bring in these warring political factions, make them sit together, whether it is India, Pakistan, Hamas, Israel, Ukraine, Russia. No, lot of bloodshed and essentially crimes against humanity. What is happening, the actions that is happening, essentially crimes against humanity, but nobody has been able to rise above their petty national interests or petty partisan interests and create peace. So that is a major identified area where this is there. Now you find occasional flashes in the pan, whether it is a Greta Thunberg or a Malala Yousafzai. You find younger generation showing some promise in rising above, but on the other hand, there is serious you know, perspectives, perspectively different opinions with respect to who funds them and why they are silent when they ought to be speaking. You need to rise above your narrow partisan political interests also. So there is a problem. Now, in the context of India, we have this disconnect between formal education and the polity. And though the elected representatives with formal education form a majority, if you look at the constitution of the parliament and the legislatures, 75 plus years of Indian independence with better schooling as compared to what was in existence earlier. And of course, the Article 21 A and the Right to Information Act and the growth of a large number of education institutions, both in the public and the private sector, has contributed to people getting educated within the country. So, economic disparity notwithstanding, the number of educated people have now become larger in number. But still, we are the one large country with largest population of illiterates in the world, largest population of illiterates in the world, and that shows up. So there is a problem with respect to this particular aspect. One of the observations made very recently was that the number of candidates, the losing candidates, if you look at the number of losing candidates, there is a majority of illiterates. So there is a serious problem where are we really, if you look at the total population, the number of illiterates are higher, uh, or number of persons with inadequate formal education are higher. So are our representatives really representing the larger segment of the population? Or is education, formal education and access to formal education actually creating a divide between the haves and the have-nots vis-a-vis the way uh, decisions are taken? Say, for example, in the last general elections, one of the perspectives towards why BJP as a party lost out in the Hindi heartland states of UP, Rajasthan, Haryana, Punjab, etc., is how they did not really pay heed to the farmers' agitation in relation to, of course, the minimum support price is a controversial issue, and the result probably we don't know, because multiple uh, perspectives are there and multiple reasons are always there, and it's very difficult to understand the pulse of the people and the factors that affect how a person really votes. It's something, and being the largest democracy, it's very difficult to identify it. But then there is one perspective that the pulse of the people was not really understood, at least in certain areas in relation to certain segments of the population, by the previous ruling class, who, no, of course, subsequent to election also, they are still the ruling classes as such, but this aspect of the disconnect is there. And because of all these things, the quality of leadership in India is also a matter of concern from another perspective, especially the context of brain drain. So one theory that why, look, when you see that on one side you have a lot of scientific developments happening, on the other side there is also the problematic aspect of our defense research, space research, etc. Though one of the best in the world, because no other countries are not significantly investing in these areas. Uh, and it's a political ambition also matters, no. But the way the progress happens, if you look at the number of persons who, after qualification, after acquiring better qualification scientifically and technologically, how they go and act as the brains for other countries, especially the US, which is acting as a melting pot for attracting intellectual capital across the world. So if you look at it, probably some of the gains that we have could have come at an earlier stage, could have come up with a better utilization of our resources, could have come up uh, uh, at significantly lesser human cost as such. And perhaps the persons who are actually doing it could have done a better job at an early point in time, had we not suffered the brain drain that we have suffered. So from that perspective also, statesmanship is something that we need to retain that talent that we are otherwise losing. So from that perspective, classrooms become important. Then there is this larger problem of criminal influence on elections, or the representation part of it. So on one side, you have a large number of criminal cases, or persons who are accused of grave criminal activities, offences in the parliament and the state legislatures, and which provides a political class as such with a bad name. On the other hand, there is a serious there allegation or there is a perspective that most of these cases are actually foisted out of petty political rivalries. So whether it is lack of leadership on account of that criminal influence, or even if it is caused on account of petty political rivalry, we need statesperson, no statesmen, to put a stop to this kind of a situation. So, uh, having politicians who have a better virtue, and having politicians who do not foist false cases on their political rivals. For both these things, we need people who are statespersons, statesmen in the legislatures. So, from that perspective, we need to actually get more people involved, uh, guide our next generation, future generation, in such a way that they find politics as an attractive option, which not just pays well. It cannot be treated as an avocation as such, but something that allows more active participation of our future generation in the politics of our country and of the world at large. And for that purpose, why classrooms become important? No, teachers are the thought leaders, and I have put in one article also in the uh, link to that article in relation to claiming recognition for teachers also as statesmen. Essentially, the thought leaders where the future generation is being molded. So whether consciously or unconsciously, the teachers have a larger than normal say as compared to any other profession in relation to how our society fares. So on one side, if we are losing talent, then it is not just on account of the policies followed by the governments, successive governments. It's also on account of how we fail as teachers to effectively incentivize our students to remain in the country, and work for the betterment of the country rather than move away at the first opportunity and ditching the country in favor of already advanced country. So that is from that perspective, you can say that in the ultimate analysis, street teachers and the classrooms of especially liberal democracies have the greatest bearing on cultivating statesmen. Now, there are some questions that we need to ask ourselves. Especially in the context of the kind of education. I'm not saying that all education institutions fall in the same uh, abyss as this, but the education that we provide, probably there is a disconnect between, on one side, the industry. None of the persons in the industry really say or claim that the education, the formal education that we provide, are really creating people who can be employed. So, so when we say that our focus is on hmm, putting out uh, technically savvy people, we are not really succeeding in that. And on the other side, in the increased pursuit of employability, we are really not giving the deserving attention that liberal art education ought to be given as a society at large. So we try to now cramp more and more portions, informations essentially, into the syllabus, leaving very little time for the student to actually reflect on any of these things. So we are not happy with the education that we provide our students. The students are not happy with respect to the education that they receive. And this is a major problem that creates a lack of statesmen in our classrooms. Then one another problem that is there is that values, ethical values, moral values, the importance that is given to both ethical and moral values in the higher secondary education and tertiary education segments is merely by way of lip service in most cases, especially in the design of curriculum and the follow up part of it. So that is a problem that we face. And one of the concepts that is of universal nature is this idea of justice. So whatever be the pedagogy, whatever be the political ideology, whatever be the religious philosophy, uh, this idea of justice, if it is really imbibed and made or interred into the bonds of the students, of what is right, what is wrong, what is just, then we will succeed in creating statesmen. So, are we equipping our students to be self aware, self conscious, and fearless to identify and do what is just, irrespective of their own vested personal interests and desire for self preservation? This is the question that every one of us need to ask as teachers, especially. Then, the liberal arts I have mentioned, classical literature is something that provides inputs, both tragedies as well as comedies. That was once the fort of education, the mainstay of most education, but now very less attention is given. The study of literature has given way to communicative English. So without literature, man is really lost. And the qualities of nobleness, chivalry, romance, everything is lost in the blind pursuit of money. And essentially, the communication has lost its charm in the SMS age. So we have found it easy to follow the herd, follow the money trail, and chuck the importance that is given to literature and language in our classes, especially in the higher classes. And that is really driven away our student population from cultivating the empathy that is required to become a true statesman. So, a curriculum that encourages and nurtures critical thinking right from the primary school might be the best possible option to cultivate statesmanship. And student participation, most often it gets manifested only when they face a crisis or a crunch situation. But we, as doting parents on one side, and on account of the evolving rights consciousness and individualism in societies have somehow put a stop to the idea that a teacher is also a parent in the larger sense, capable of capable of guiding and fostering those essential skill sets in a child, and of course in every student at a later point in life, that are beneficial to the society. Now we become more so the duty consciousness part of it is gone. We have become more of a rights conscious society, and it scares the teachers from taking uh, uh, looking at teaching the way they were doing it earlier. So this is another area that is a problem which we need to address in our classrooms. And some solutions that was there earlier, which we have lost uh, in the way we scheme our things. There was a time when, before entering the job scene after schooling, people uh, went out on their own, explored the world, understood it, and then came back uh, to for either higher studies or for pursuing an avocation. Now, those are not really encouraged. No, there is now no gap as such, and gap year needs to be now explained. Otherwise, it is looked upon as something that is out of the ordinary and which becomes a problem for the candidate to get a job. So that is one problem that is there. Our idea that these are things that are not necessary is now very prominent. Then one more problem that is there is in relation to this idea of critical thinking and how critical thinking becomes an important aspect of statesmanship. So from here onwards, my slides are focusing on what exactly is a way we need to look into our classroom teaching. So one of the essential aspects in relation to creating a statesperson or statesman is their ability to think uh, without blindly following any particular ideology. So the Socratic method of asking questions and making these people, the younger generation, think and answer and leading them in the right direction through debates and discussions is a method that every teacher can use for developing the analytical skills that is required of every statesman. The reasoning, especially the logical reasoning part of it in decision making, the problem solving frameworks that are there, making a student apply the theory that they uh, study in the classrooms in practical settings, either using case studies or role playing exercises, simulations, so that they are able to actually understand the context in which a theory can be particularly useful. And of course, it helps to innovate on those existing theories also. So reasoning skills are something that needs to be developed in the classrooms. A post-truth world needs the future generation to be equipped with a very healthy sense of skepticism and the questioning and inquiry, which a formal education, the way we right now practice in most of our academia, which discourages questioning and which there is a tendency to put labels on the base of the questions that you asked, uh, which brackets people into different pigeonholes, which creates a chilling effect on further questioning. So that is something that we need to avoid in the classrooms by encouraging uh, people, the future generation, to be critical with respect to the source of their information, and to seek more evidence and to come to their own conclusions, especially trying to keep an open mind with respect to what is happening around them, to be really in touch with what is happening around them. Then this is an age of passions, emotional regulations, the emotional quotient part of it, the emotional intelligence part of it. Uh, Most often we find that advertising that was essentially used for commercial purposes earlier is now one of those tools that are used to influence political discourse. And so subtle is the psychological tools that are used to create a sense of emotional urgency and to arouse passions in the mind, is something that, again, can be overcome only through mindfulness, meditation. Reflective journaling is one tool that can be encouraged, so that every student, if they can run what they have seen and experienced during that day and reflect on it at the end of the day, probably it becomes a better tool for them to become better persons the next day based on whatever they have experienced the previous day, rather than being reactive with respect to their approach to the world. So, a proactive worldview is something that needs to be cultivated, and that requires long term thinking and planning, uh, and not losing the larger picture. If the larger picture is instilled in the minds of every young individual, then they will not be lost in the meandering day-to-day life, the problems that are created by the day-to-day life. The immediacy of everything is not going to draw them away from the larger picture. So, goal setting, the strategic planning, encouraging initiative and foresight in students, and appreciating them for it in our classroom discussions is something that encourages this the creating statesmen in classrooms. Then the global perspective, understanding this ancient Bharatiya concept of Vasudeva Kudumbakam. The world is uh, one as such, one big family. This idea of a global citizen, and that can be encouraged by international collaborations. These are the days when you need not really travel between different states in order to have international collaboration, and all that is required is just the will and a loss of fear to step away from our own fences, which curbs our thinking, free thinking, and ask uh, Google and find who are the best thought leaders in our generation with respect to what interests us. Ask them. Put up a email, ask, and you will find answers and enough and more avenues for international collaboration. And there is an incentive also from the national education policy for encouraging this. And some of the best institutions in the world uh, have large scale collaborative efforts. And if you look at most of the advancements in science these days, you will find papers being written by thousands of people working together in collaborative projects. So it's not something that is new or novel. It's something that is really doable. And exchange programs and cross cultural studies help us in understanding and appreciating the other perspectives. Then this idea of impartiality, avoiding partisanship, and how do we remain non-partisans? That is only possible if you have a balanced discussion on controversial topics. Get people into our classrooms, or get the views of others into the classroom, so that the students are led to have different perspectives rather than one singular perspective with respect to what is right and what is wrong. No, leave it open to them to come to their own conclusions with respect to this, but allow them access to different or encourage them to have access to different perspectives on every controversial topic that can be gathered in the confines of your classroom. Again, it requires a certain skill set on the part of the teacher not to get identified with any of these controversial topics, also any side of the controversial topics, so that ultimately how neutral a teacher is encourages the students to accept, to learn to accept that there are different perspectives that are possible. Then of course, globalized world, you need to think beyond the nation state. So thinking globally while strengthening national ethos is something that is required. National and global responsibilities demand that we talk about these aspects in relation to know, dealing with our own local problems. Then principles of fairness and justice in leadership, ethical decision making process can only be uh, encouraged through having actual live ethical courses and workshops and real life applications, and then encouraging students and leading them in community service so that they understand how the teachers have the best influence in relation to community service, and it's not just rote learning that is required. Then a sense of brotherhood, unity, group activities in the class can be used for encouraging that, and inclusive classroom practices. These are things that are essential with respect to getting uh, uh, statesmen you know, being trained in our classroom. Some of the biographies of statesmen, if we can load them in the library and not just load them over there, but encourage the students to, with activities which involve looking into those biographies will help them identify some of those traits that made these people statesmen. So some bibliography and references that are there. The first one is especially good in relation to understanding the role of statesmen in the modern state. And this last one throws insight into where we stand as teachers in relation to getting this. And some of the books that are recommended reading, these links provide whether when there is a copyright expiry or when it is available in some internet source. When the original text is available, I have placed a thing also over there. But others are recent works, available works, which helps the teacher to have a better perspective with respect to their classroom role as such. So that's it from my part.
So we have our first question by Professor K. Ambarish Murthy. Is it possible to instill statesmanship in students without training for teachers? Do we have them incorporated in NEP 2020?
My reaction to that is that, of course, everybody, every one of us know that it is not possible. Teacher training is something that is essential. Now, the question is, what kind of teacher training? So the problem is that in the schools, you have you don't become a teacher unless you have a training to be a teacher. But in the context of higher education sector, especially the tertiary education sector, that is not a prerequisite, which is a real issue. So you pass the net and you are thrown open, no, you're thrown into the classroom to deal with the students, and you catch it as it comes. And there is absolutely nothing other than the institutional interest that really drives a teacher in relation to this. So teacher training, from that perspective, under the NEP, it's left open to the employer's consent. That is why one of the things that I identified is that ultimately it boils down to the institution. Are we are we having statesmen running institutions in the sense that that institution really wants to imbibe these senses, these qualities in the students? Or are we running in education institutions? Are these education institutions run by people who are only trying to make money or promote their particular petty interests and not really trying to create statesmen? So if an education institution really wants to create statesmen, if they are trying to create thought leaders, then of course they will invest in teaching the teachers first. I think I have answered that question.
Thank you, sir, for that. Do we have another question? Yeah, sir, how can it be included in the curriculum?
The teacher training part of it, or how a teacher is supposed to create statesmen, which part of it? If it is a teacher training part of it, it cannot be included in the curriculum. It is not part of it, because we don't have a curriculum which is forced on teachers other than FDP. There is an orientation and a faculty development program that is part of the NEP also, and the UGC also mandates it. But there is no uniformity with respect to how it is conducted across the various centers that UGC has identified. At least there are some places if you look for it, there are some places who manage to bring in the best talent, but there are others also which are not really serious about it. All that is required is that no, you do it, you have a certificate, and that's it. If teachers are living in a self delusional world, then it becomes a problem. So ultimately, it boils down to who are we attracting as teachers into the profession. So that is one part of it. The second part of it, I am not an advocate of any straitjacket with respect to how to handle the students. No, we can motivate students, but each individual is a unique creature of God, of course. So, and of course, every teacher must be given the flexibility that is required to establish a one-to-one relationship with that student, which every student, and then allow for that motivation. So it cannot be part of any curriculum. It is just a part of the training itself. How equipped is a teacher, how motivated is the student, and what is the original role of that, what is the original goal of the institution? Is it really out there to create statesmen? These are the things that really matter. NEP does not come in the way, but NEP is also, you are looking at India, no? And it's a all uh, world here with a variety of cultures, everything that is in this melting pot of cultures. So you can't have a single fixed kind of notion about this. And one of the aspects of NEP is to encourage institutions to become leaders, so that those significant features that keeps them apart from the other institutions, that gets them a better rank in the whether it is a Nair or NAC, whatever is a framework, that will attract the best talents. It's a question of how well you can sell what you really are. So that is a competition that is now being unleashed.
Thank you, sir, for that. We have another question from Professor Ambarish. Is it because of absence of role models that we are finding it difficult to impart visionary thinking and statesmanship?
Again, role model where? So if you're looking for role models, you have enough number of role models in enough number of places. Question is, are we really on the lookout for a role model? Are we? Role model does not happen on their own. No, it took a Plato to bring out the Aristotle. It took who knew about Bentham until Austin came in. So we need to identify who should be a role model. You can't expect the role model to be out there teaching. Sometimes they do, most often they don't. We need to identify the best qualities in the number of people that are there in the society, the thought leaders that are in the society, identify them, bring them to the limelight, bring them to our classes, whether it is by way of actual interaction with our students, or whether finding their book of their own, or whether some bit on the social media which they have put in. So we need to identify that as teachers and then bring them to our classroom, so that our students get identified with these people, that with these thought processes. And there is no single role model. No, Google may be reaching that position of being the god as such of these times, but nobody is a role model with respect to all the aspects. No, even if you talk about Mahatma Gandhi as a statesman, there has been significant flaws associated with the way he conducted himself. In hindsight, no, we can point it out, but that is not what we are talking about. A role model with respect to a particular thing. So nobody can be a role model with respect to everything. It's for the teacher to identify what all role models are there vis-a-vis what they're trying to teach and motivate the students with. So from that perspective, again, it falls on the teacher's shoulders to identify and present those persons before the classes.
Thank you, sir, for that. We have another question from Govardhan, sir. Can educational institutions create statement practically, or the experience from the society and their views on the world create better statesmen?
So it's not a crucible for statesmen, but if you look at it, there has been some institutions in the current century and the previous ones, which has actually created or attracted uh, those who are eventually known as statesmen into their hallowed halls of wisdom. So it's a question of how well our education institutions are equipped and organized to get those kinds of students into their classrooms. So it's not a one-way process where you teach and then everybody becomes a statesman. No, it's also a question of how well that institution is framed, uh, both with respect to human talent as well as with respect to incentives, scholarships, infrastructure, everything to get the best talents also. So one aspect of the brain drain is our lack of those spaces. That is one of the reasons why people flee India. So getting those talents back in might be a better way. Please understand that not everybody is not going to be a statesman. Not every politician is going to be a statesman. Not every technocrat is going to be a statesman. Not everybody has in them, in each one of us. No, we are not statesmen. But there are areas, there are people who can, in the crisis of a particular situation, show the statesman's abilities. Our idea as teachers must be to make our students feel that there is a need to improve themselves, so that if that crisis time comes, they will know. It's somebody was telling this to me. It is a time that throws up a leader. So you need a particular leader means there has to be a society that is tuned to create that leader. So if you need a statesman, there has to be an imperative need within the society that throws up that mantle on somebody. So from that perspective, we can only provide and then hope that one of those students that goes or is touched by our teaching, essentially at a later point in time becomes a statesman that we want them to be. Not every one of us is going to put all our energy into one singular aspect of our life. And some way along the way, somewhere along the churn of our life, we lose that focus. It could be your family, it could be economic distress, it could be any number of things that intervenes. It could be a health, anything can intervene. No? And irrespective of our ideals in the teenage years or in the early 20s, how many of us can really work the way we want our students to work, to be statesmen? So it's just a process. But the more the number of institutions that are doing that process, the better the chances that we'll have more statesmen in our country. And that is what I am trying to impress.
Thank you, sir, for that. Sir, there's one more question from Professor Ambarish. Community participation and engagement is lacking in schools and colleges. Do you think that is an obstacle for statesmanship to emerge?
I'll take it in two ways. Okay, one is that it is lacking in certain schools and colleges. Okay, with Rajagiri as the host, I can never say that community participation and engagement is lacking, because this is one institution which really puts a premium on community participation, and the camps that it conducts, especially for the social sciences. It's something that is really important. We have the NSS program, which is a universal kind of a thing so far as India is concerned. Every college is really allowed to encourage that kind of community participation. And of course, every institution, every university, every college is free to devise its own forms of community participation. I come from a legal background. Every law college is supposed to have a legal aid cell, which is nothing but community participation. So we can't say that it is not there. But on the other side, are we paying any trust as such? A large number of institutions pay only lip service. What is the main reason for that? We don't have faculty who are willing to take the strain, because it is going to be it's something that is over and above the normal working hours. You need to spend Saturdays and Sundays and after hours for this particular purpose. And unless the faculty is given some kind of an encouragement, whether it is economic or otherwise, whatever is motivating that particular person, this is not going to be given the full thrust that is there. So unless the institution wants it, it's not going to happen. And unless the UGC perhaps or some regulator insists on it, especially in the context of documentation, nothing is going to happen. So this is the lacuna as such. It's not that we are not having it. It's not that our system does not favor it. It is just that ultimately it boils down to the institution. The institutions think and are able now to get away without, with paying lip service only, and that is a problem, and that is something that creates a mediocre institution.